So today I'm going to answer a question that's as old as time itself. Why is Modern Warfare's file size so big? I mean, when Yoda said size matters not, he didn't realize that Modern Warfare would take up nearly 200 gigabytes of space on his 500 GB PS4. I mean, that's actually 40% of your space that you're given on a base PlayStation 4. That can't be good. That's not good. And of course, like Infinity Ward or Activision or any sane developer would never actually tell you why their game's taking up that much space. And there are definitely enough conspiracy theories going around that suggest that Activision is trying to put a monopoly on your PlayStation or Xbox or whatever you have it on. And I can't really talk in place of Activision because that's actually a really smart idea, you know? I mean, if one game's taking up 200 gigs, how many games can you even fit on there, right? Like most games themselves are like, 50, 60, upwards of 100 gigs now, and one game takes up 200, so like you're really just gonna be able to have maybe 2 or 3 games maximum on there. So it's smart, I get it, but I don't think that's the reason why it takes up that much space. I think the reason is actually far simpler and less conspiracy friendly. I think it's just because the game looks good. I know what you guys must be thinking though. Like, a lot of games look good, and most of them don't take up nearly as much space as COD, which admittedly is very true, but let me explain that further into what actually goes into making a game not only look good, but actually just look. Like what makes the graphics of a game. You see, graphics consist of things that would fall into these 4 categories: lighting, particle effects, textures, and models. In Modern Warfare, just about everything is high res, which is great, right? It's visually appealing to the eye, but it's also not good for your space. And the 2 things that affect your space the most in this case are lighting and textures, mostly because they go hand in hand. The problem is, without good lighting and textures, you're not going to have a good looking game. You can have lower poly models, you know, like as you see in like indie games generally, but it's really the textures and the way the light reacts to them that makes a game look good. And we know it, and this happens outside of games too. I mean, if you were to take a picture of yourself or of anything under good lighting, then that picture would look better than if you were to take a picture of yourself or anything under bad lighting. I mean, we know this, right? We have seen it before. But of course, like, good and bad lighting means what's appropriate for the setting. And in this case, in Modern Warfare's case, good lighting refers to as realistic as it gets. The problem is, the better the lighting, the more space it takes up. And lighting is notorious for taking up space, more so than textures themselves. And when I say it takes up a significant amount of space, I really mean that it takes up way more space. I'm talking like it can be upwards of like gigabytes worth of difference for like one lighting data versus like all of your textures if you like in their raw form. Like, that's crazy. Like, that's how much space it takes up. But of course, you know, in AAA games and AAA engines, you have certain tool sets to help compress all that. Textures themselves are also notorious for this. But like, the thing is with them, not only do they take up a ton of space, but they don't last nearly as long in terms of visual fidelity. Like, a game with good lighting and half decent textures will look better for longer than a game with decent lighting and decent textures, or decent lighting and good textures. Just simply because lighting is solely responsible for just everything that looks visually appealing. Even something like 2K quality textures will take up tons of space. So in Modern Warfare, if you were to look at like a building, that building probably has, or really any given asset, right? Any given asset in Modern Warfare, I would say, probably has around 30 to 40 textures on it. And I don't just specifically mean like each side per se. I also mean the stuff that adds depth to the buildings and stuff. So like, for example, like you have a brick wall, right? Nobody is going to actually model a wall brick by brick. They're just going to make a rectangle and they're going to slap a brick texture onto it. And then on top of that, they'll add in other depth textures, as I like to call them, that will add depth into like the little cracks and whatnot, and it will actually make it look like a brick wall the way you're seeing it in game. So when you do this for every single side and you do it for every single asset, you think about it, each multiplayer map definitely has like upwards of hundreds of textures, right? Because if you have maybe like 4 per side, each model is taking up 30. I mean, like, each multiplayer map has probably like maybe like 30-40 models to begin with, not counting the player character models and everything else. And remember, Modern Warfare, everything is rendered in high res. And on top of that, like, each map in Modern Warfare is unique. I mean, and even the ones that aren't unique, like for example, like Vacant or something, they have different textures that apply in different times. So for example, like Vacant is rendered differently in Ground War than it is in the multiplayer version, than it is in Warzone, than it is in Spec Ops if it's there, right? Because they're all different zones, so you have to render things differently in order to make things look better, right? I would say Vacant looks the best in multiplayer, simply because most of the graphics are going into that one square, as opposed to in Ground War when you have to render, you know, something about 10-20 times as large as Vacant itself, right? So now you have assets that not only have their given amount of textures, but they're just taking up space after space. And so, and you know, this isn't even counting like the Warzone, the map itself, and it's not even counting Campaign. Campaign has even higher res textures, right? Because you can get away with more things because you're not rendering it for everybody at once, you're rendering it just for the player, and you can get away with more tricks here and there. And so naturally the game's gonna take up a lot of space just because the game looks good. There are so many things that are in the game that make it look good. Now admittedly, 200 gigs is a lot of space, and I'm not trying to defend Infinity Ward in this. I was simply trying to provide like an answer or a possible answer to why it's taking up that much space. And you know, however, in Infinity Ward's defense, they have just created a new engine. There's a very good possibility that at the launch of this game, or well into the post-launch of this game, they didn't have the proper toolsets created to properly compress files. Which is why the game grew in space so fast, but now, I was saying the last couple of months, it's only probably gone up by like 20 gigs. Which is normal, which makes sense, that's normal. But at first launch, it had gone up by like 50, 60, 70 gigs, like simply because they might not have had the proper tool sets. And as the game cycle progresses, and as Modern Warfare 2, the reboot comes in a couple of years, this game will take up less and less space because they'll have mastered the new engine they just created, they'll have the proper tool sets to compress everything and properly, and really like we'll finally be, you know, not taking up 200 gigs on our PS5s, you know, in a couple of years or whatever. So that's what I just wanted to say. That's, you know, like there is a reason why Modern Warfare takes up so much space on your PlayStation or on your Xbox or on your PC. Again, also those systems also compress files differently on their own as well. So you have a lot of things that are currently in play. And this is the first time with Infinity Ward trying to make a game that actually, you know, I would say meets AAA standards now in terms of graphical fidelity and like graphical quality and whatnot. And they're working with a new engine. So that's all I have for you guys today. I mean, I hope that kind of answers some questions. Again, I don't work for Infinity Ward, so I can't really say how their engine specifically works. But that's my take on it based on my experience with other engines, like such as the Unreal Engine and Unity and whatnot. So I thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys in the next one.